Okay, you can start when you're ready.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barak ala sayyidina Muhammad al-Fatih lima ughliq wal khatim lima sabaq nasir al-haqq bil haqq wal hadi ila siratik al-mustaqim wa ala alihi haqq qadrihi miqdaran 'azim. In the year 1773, there was a African scholar that was born. His name was Umar ibn Sa'id. Umar ibn Sa'id spent roughly 25 years studying the Islamic tradition, and throughout this time, he went back and taught his own people in his own village for 6 years of that time. So in our modern context, he was essentially a tenured professor. He did all 12 grades of school. He did a PhD. He did a postdoc. And so he was a bona fide scholar. And after doing this, in the year 1807, he was kidnapped and stolen and forced into enslavement, shipped across the Atlantic to a land that he himself mentions that he did not speak the language that was very, very foreign to him. He was purchased and bought and put into forced slavery that was very, very difficult for a person of his stature, someone who had spent so much time studying the tradition of Islam. This was beyond his capacity, and he gathered the strength and he fled. He ran for miles and miles until he found a house, which was actually a church he didn't know, where he stopped and he started to make Salah. Going in this church, he didn't know that it was a white only, it was a church of whites. And this became something that was illegal at that time. And so because of it, someone saw him, they came back with 2 other people and dogs, and they chased him until they found him. Upon finding him, they captured him and walked him to another place and imprisoned him for some time. While in prison, Umar ibn Sa'id, or Sheikh Umar ibn Sa'id, as we should respectfully refer to him as, was reviewing the text that he had memorized at a younger age, writing them on the walls of his prison cell. And this gained the attention of the people whom were watching him. And so someone came to purchase him, and they said, listen, we can send you back to your former master in South Carolina. Or what he said, listen, I would rather die here in this cell than to go back to that oppressive person. And so because of his intelligence, because of this who he was and how he carried himself, long story short, he was offered to the warden's uncle, and he purchased him. Now, the warden's uncle was a very nice person, as Abdul Sa'id mentions in his biography, and he gave him clothing of the same clothing that he dressed and wore, and he gave him the same food that he ate. And in this time, he was given a Quran in Arabic script, or excuse me, a Bible in Arabic script, and Umar was able to convince the people of his time that he had embraced the Christian tradition. Now, all scholars by modern academic studies say that Umar Sa'id never left his religion of Islam. And how we know that is because on the first page of his autobiography, he starts it with Tabarak alladhi biyadihi al-mulk. Glory be to the one whose hand or whose power is control of everything. Now, Sayyidi Umar ibn Sa'id was starting his autobiography off with a page, the first chapter, or excuse me, the first section of Surah Al-Mulk. And this was showing not only for himself, but for us when we read today, that this man never left his tradition. But more importantly, though in enslavement, though in bondage, he never forgot that true power, true connection, and true emancipation comes from Allah and Allah alone, despite no matter what our worldly situation may be. And I mentioned that story because in the year 1807, when he was captured, was the year that the shipment or the importation of enslaved Africans was deemed illegal by the United States government. So not only was he stolen into enslavement and forced labor, but he also was smuggled in such of a way. Today, June 19th, commemorates 155 years of what is deemed, especially in the African American community, as Juneteenth. While in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, deeming that all enslaved people were now free. It was nearly 2.5 years later, in 1865, that this notice got to the farthest extents of Texas, and they then proclaimed that they were the last to proclaim that all enslaved people were free. Now, this Emancipation Proclamation and this celebration of Juneteenth is celebrating when, figuratively, because we know by modern study, and we could enumerate the numerous things that how enslaved people then lived under subjugation of the Jim Crow South, and then even after 1965 and 1963 with Board versus Education, and then the Voter Rights Act, that systematic and prejudiced treatment of the descendants of these same enslaved people, whom we know nearly a conservative estimate of 30% of them were Muslim, still continues out till today. But the reason why I'm mentioning this, because as Muslims, not only gleaning from the heritage of someone like Umar ibn Sa'id and our ancestors who first came to this country as Muslims, we cannot forget Tabarak alladhi biyadihi al-mulk, that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is in control of all things. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all dominion, all creation has control over. So us, when we're thinking about emancipation, true existential, spiritual, metaphysical emancipation, we're talking about being free, then it only is found in Allah. And this is why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Ajaban li amrin mu'min kulluhu khair." It is amazing, astounding is the affair of the believer, that all of it is good. That if they're afflicted with something that they are happy with, that pleases them, they're grateful. They shakar, then they are grateful. And if they're afflicted with something that displeases them, then they are patient. Brothers and sisters, if we are truly going to try to live as Muslims, but more importantly, or excuse me, not more importantly, but particularly in the time that we're living in today, when systematic racism is talked about everywhere, when oppression is really, and white supremacy is being brought up to the modern conversation, is really being focused on in our time today, we need to check and analyze what systematic oppression do we have inherently in ourselves. What oppression do we think, what colonization have our minds gone through? Because really, whether it's white supremacy or oppression, or to look at this, all is a spiritual ill. Obviously, it is a systematic thing. It is a educational, economical, social, political, in every aspect, shape, form, or fashion. But as Muslims, we can't forget the spiritual ill that this is coming from. We cannot forget the fact that this ill stems from deep down in our hearts. It stems from arrogance. And this ill is something that the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, is something that none of us will enter into Jannah unless, even if we have an atom's weight of arrogance in our hearts. Brothers and sisters, we need to remember that if we truly want to find salvation, we need to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do the work on ourselves. Try to remove these ills from our hearts so that we can really make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy. What I'm saying, brothers and sisters, is not only that our existential, our salvation in the next life means that we work on ourselves. It means that we fight the arrogance that's within ourselves and we remove this ignorance, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentioned, speaking to one of the companions. But it also means that this work is not easy. And this work is not something that we can just put a hashtag on Twitter, or we can black out our social media pages. It means that we need to really check ourselves and introspectively question what it is that we're thinking, what it is that we're processing, how is it that we look at ourselves and we look at the rest of the world. Brothers and sisters, this work is not work that is only for society. It's not only work that we need to do so that we can live as better human beings. It's work that we have to do as Muslims so that we can earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. African Americans have lived in oppression, and minorities, but more specifically African Americans, the descendants of enslaved Africans, went through 339 years of slavery, starting at 1526, when not 1619 as we like to focus on, but 1526, when the first enslaved Africans were brought here by Spanish explorers, continuing on until 1863, and then 1865 when it was effectively practiced out. They went through another 100 years of Jim Crow legal systematic segregation. And then afterwards, until 1975, there was legalized redlining and separation of different places, and then continued on after that. African Americans have gone through this oppression, but as Muslims, we need to challenge ourselves and think to how we think about it. If we find ourselves questioning or thinking, oh, it's just bad culture. If we find ourselves thinking that this is something that they have to do, no, it's something that all of us have to do. It's work that we need to do to earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure so that we can live as people whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be pleased with. Alhamdulillah, you have Imam Abdullah Farooq who's going to be speaking to you later this evening. And regardless of what he's going to say, whether he's speaking on this issue or not, it is amazing and it's commendable that you as a community are uplifting our community specifically from within the inner city, but who have been serving since way beyond I was born, and perhaps even my parents were born. And so we have to learn from our teachers. We have to learn from people who have been doing it. But again, just really to send the message home, we have to learn from our ancestors like Umar ibn Sa'id, who despite living as a scholar, as our modern context, a tenured professor, and then being sold into enslaved bondage, he never forgot Tabarak alladhi biyadihi al-mulk, that glory be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who all dominion is. No matter what we are scared of, no matter what we're insecure about, no matter what we think or we assume or we've been conditioned to feel, this is the work of tarbiyah, of tazkiyah, that we need to do to our nufus, so that to our souls, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be pleased with us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it so that we can always be mindful of not only Tabarak alladhi biyadihi al-mulk, but of the people whom have sacrificed and have lived in a way so that we can have, we, myself included, but all of us can have the pleasures and the comforts that we experience today. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people who are constantly fighting against ourselves, that we're constantly fighting against nafs al-lawama, our evil lower selves, so that we can be people whom achieve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure, whether it be that we have purified ourselves of these illnesses, or that we can meet him and we can at least testify that we have sincerely tried to do so. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the strength and the fortitude to fight against the ignorance and the ills that are within ourselves, and do it on a communal level so that we can be a beacon of light for our society, our community, exemplifying this or reflecting rather the light of our beloved sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, whom we know and where we can take all of this from. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with the awareness and with the mindfulness, the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because as he said in the Quran, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. Those who are mindful, those who are in awe and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will make a way out for them and provide for them in ways they can never imagine. Brothers and sisters, we cannot think that this rizq, this provision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about in the Quran is only in a material fashion. This rizq is in a spiritual fashion. It's in a holistic, emotional, sociological, psychological, and spiritual way as well. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues on saying, وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. And those who put their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will suffice them. This is what Umar ibn Sa'id was gleaning from. He had his trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a way out for him, not only in a material way where he's able to live comfortably and be able to, for us to have his biography written that we can glean from on this very day today, but it's way that he was able to elevate and transcend above and beyond any trials that he had in this worldly life. Ya Allah, Ya Kareem, Ya Rahman Rahim. Anything that I said was from Allah and Allah alone. Anything I said was incorrect from myself and myself alone. Please forgive me of being long-winded or perhaps speaking quickly. Please make dua for our teachers, Imam Abdullah Farouk, who's going to be speaking this evening, Sheikh Abdurrahman, and all of our teachers whom allowed us and that we stand on their shoulders to be where we are today. And please forgive me of my shortcomings. Please make dua for my family. Barakallahu fikum wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.